right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Richardson, and I am the co-executive director and chief counsel at Veterans Legal Services. And we're really excited to have you all with us this morning. Before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping items that I want to be sure that we cover. So first off, we are recording this program so that we can share it with those who weren't able to join us today. And we'll be making a copy available on our website, veteranslegalservices.org, after today's program. I also just want to thank you all for spending the morning with us. We had over 100 registered attendees from the legal field, other nonprofits, academia, foundations, and government. So it's really wonderful to have you all with us. And I want to take a moment to invite you all to introduce yourselves by posting your name and the organization that you're with in the chat, so folks have a sense of who's in the room with us. It's too bad that we can't all be together in person, but wonderful that you're able to spend an hour with us this morning. We will be saving some time at the end for questions, so please do feel free to post those in the chat as we go along. We're going to cover a range of topics today. And one of our team members, Jeff, will be monitoring the chat for those and helping us compile those questions as we go. To make sure that we get all of those, please do post your comments to both the panelists and attendees to make sure that we see those at the end. So with that, in just a minute, I'll introduce our distinguished guest, Martha Minow. But first, I just want to give a little bit of background on Veterans Legal Services if this is your first encounter with us. So our mission at Veterans Legal Services is to promote self-sufficiency, stability, and financial security for homeless and low-income veterans through the provision of free civil legal services. And we were founded in 1991 by a group of Boston College law students who saw that the legal needs of the residents of the New England Center and Home for Veterans were going unmet by both the private bar and other legal aid resources. And nearly 30 years later, our relationship with the New England Center remains one of our flagship community partnerships. And in a non-COVID environment, we still have a physical presence there. And in fact, have been working with them to expand our work through that program. So, in a traditional environment, our service delivery model involves going on site to homeless shelters, service centers, the Bedford VA Medical Center, the Chelsea Soldiers Home, Norfolk County Veterans Treatment Court. These are just examples. And we have a presence on site at these facilities where we can work with other service providers to collaboratively meet veterans' needs and remove legal barriers to veteran success. Obviously, COVID has meant big changes for us. These are high-risk congregate environments. So we've had to virtualize our services over the last 9 months or so, and we'll talk about that more during today's program. Our target for our efforts is around core areas of veteran well-being, such as housing, family, and finances. And each year we serve about 700 veterans on about 800 cases. Which you can see some of our clients are coming to us with multiple issues that we're taking action on. We look forward to returning to our community partner sites once COVID has been resolved and we're able to safely do that. But we're also looking forward to applying the lessons that we've learned through the pandemic to our future programming. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce this morning's guest, Martha Minow. Martha is the 300th anniversary university professor at Harvard Law School, where she has taught since 1981. So she's about to celebrate her 40th anniversary as a professor at Harvard Law. She also served as the Morgan and Helen Chu Dean of the Law School from 2009 to 2017, taking over the position from Elena Kagan. And while Martha has strengthened public interest and clinical programs at the school, she's also worked to improve the diversity of faculty and staff, as well as students, and expanded programs and opportunities for interdisciplinary study. She's a world-renowned expert in human rights and a former board member of the Legal Services Corporation. Martha is also a longtime member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and recently co-chaired an academy project, Civil Justice for All. which is going to be the meat of our discussion today. This incredibly important report not only details the civil justice gap that exists in our country, and that's when we talk about the civil justice gap, we're talking about the difference between the legal needs of people in our community versus the resources available to meet those needs, particularly for those who are low income and don't have financial resources to secure them. The report also offers an array of concrete and practical recommendations to meet the ever-growing challenge of the civil justice gap. So Martha, I want to welcome you and thank you for co-chairing this project and this very timely report. I know that there's a lot of people in our audience who may have not had a chance to take a look at the report or really digest its contents. So to lay the foundation for our discussion this morning, I want to begin by sharing a short video that the Academy has produced to accompany the report to just give our audience some context for the discussion.
You have reached the Kings County Civil Supreme Court. If you are an unrepresented litigant and would like to
Welcome to the Department of Veterans Affairs Telephone Assistance Service.
Thank you for calling the Missouri Unemployment Insurance Claim. You have reached the Superior Court for the County of Los Angeles. Montana Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence.
If the employee files for PUA and does not fall under one of the 11 eligibility categories.
Environmental emergencies, please call the 24-hour hotline at 1.
There's something about this country that you don't normally hear about in school, on TV, or wherever you get your news these days. Most of us experience at least one civil justice problem every year. Not criminal problems, but civil ones, related to things like your job, your benefits, your home, maybe even your family. No matter where you live, there are legal rights and protections that can be used to solve these types of problems. But if you can't afford a lawyer, or don't understand the legal system to begin with, you're probably trying to solve them on your own.
I called an appointment every day, and I would call them, and you would be on hold for like 6, 7, 8 hours, and then they would literally hang up on you.
As soon as you get that denial letter, you got to wait a year. Then you do it again, got to wait a year. I just got approved for something from 1991, about 3 months ago.
In family court, you're not given an attorney. You have to pay thousands of dollars. Like I had a thrift savings plan, and I spent all of that paying for lawyers, paying for custody evaluations.
I was told that I was worthless for 3 years and then beaten. I didn't think there was any resources. I didn't think anybody would care.
Our ability to access some kind of legal assistance is perhaps the best tool we have to access justice. But the Americans who most need civil legal assistance don't often receive it. Americans experience about 150 million new civil justice problems every year. For low-income Americans, it's estimated that only 1 in 5 problems are ever reported, and only 14% of those problems receive adequate legal attention. For anyone who doesn't get help, the cascade of consequences can be catastrophic.
I thought I had a right to be heard by the appeal first, but without warning or notice, the DA office came to Indiana, knocked my door in with a battering ram, guns drawn, and snatched my son.
I was a shell of a person. I had bad thoughts in my head. I didn't think I couldn't get any help. The struggle of this almost killed me.
Honestly, the day I ran, I thought, I'm not going to get to keep this kid, but at least she'll be safe tonight.
A silver lining of recent events has been the resilience and ingenuity of service providers who have been finding new ways to reach people in need. They've shown us that change can happen quickly and remind us that crisis brings opportunity. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences has issued a new report that calls for the legal profession, the courts, law schools, tech professionals, and partners from many other fields to join forces in providing legal assistance to many more people in need.
Civil justice means a fair shot at living a better quality of life, a fair shot for our kids to live a longer life.
Just please help me right away. I'm doing what I can and having an ally in that process.
In the game of life I won, that had more to do with civil legal aid and then just the opportunity to rebuild.
To have the service I was allowed to with the Legal Aid Foundation, we went the distance for almost 3 years.
Me being able to see my son and help to raise him and have a relationship with my son.
We all have a right to access justice. The nation should meet the challenge of providing civil justice with a process that is itself accessible, not just to a lucky few, but to all Americans.
Yep. So welcome, Martha, and I want to thank you again for your role in co-chairing this report. Here we are in the middle of a global pandemic, and the civil justice gap is nothing new, but this report came out in September. So I want to talk a little bit about what motivated this right now in this moment that we're having.
Well, thank you, Anna, and thank you for your work, and thank everyone for being here. As the video glances at the Supreme Court building, which has carved above the door equal justice under law, the motivation for this report really is to make that real. Equal justice under the law should be a right, not a privilege, not available to just some, not everyone. And to be working on this as we have been for 2.5 years and then have the pandemic hit. Really, the pandemic in many ways is like a big spotlight exposing all of the holes in our social safety net and the failures to deliver on the promises of the society. And so we were able in this study and the report to talk with people who are making a real difference and to identify new avenues where there can be some real improvements. I co-chaired not only the whole report, but also the subcommittee on veterans. And I'm so very glad to be here today and to really call out the very excellent work that VLS does. As well as to commend my old friend, Alan Ryan, your board chair, my former student, Joseph Kearns Goodwin, and I have such high regard for all of you.
Well, thank you. And we were so pleased to see the legal needs of veterans highlighted as part of this project. It's certainly something we know intimately through the work that we do, but often encouraging both the veterans we work with and their other service providers to think of issues as having a potential legal solution is one of our challenges and something we work to educate our community partners on regularly, because people don't necessarily think of housing insecurity or food insecurity or financial challenges as having a legal solution. But as the report highlights, there often is a legal component to that. And one of the fascinating conclusions and disappointing conclusions actually that I saw was, there's a reference to this study that said 86% of people who tried to access an attorney but that could not afford one were not able to. So we're meeting a tiny sliver of need. Here in Massachusetts, pre-pandemic, we did some research and found, we worked with an outside consultant who found that there's approximately 11,000 veterans in Massachusetts before the pandemic who would have a potential unmet legal need and be financially eligible for VLS's services. And as I mentioned before, we're serving about 700 veterans a year. So you can see the gap was vast before we got to COVID. Certainly, we have high rates of unemployment in Massachusetts. People are facing unprecedented financial challenges right now. Issues of access to core safety net resources are more challenging than ever. So we do expect that we're going to be feeling the effects of this for many years to come on our client population. And as you noted, COVID has really sort of stripped the veneer off and shown us where those gaps and holes have been all along. I mentioned at the outset, we've really had to adapt our services. So starting back in March, we ended up in a situation where rather abruptly, we're having our staff work at home. We can no longer be on site, which has been a core part of our service delivery model that we found really effective. So what we've done with our team is to completely convert all of our services to a virtual format. And the courts are doing a lot of hearings over Zoom and things like that, which also allows us to operate in that fashion. But what we had to think about was, if you're someone who has virtually no financial resources, how are you going to get to us? And we realized telephone is sort of the least common denominator that we could go to with that. So we've tried to make services accessible. People can fill out a form online on our website. They can call our office. And it's been a challenge, but certainly one that we've risen to, and that's forced us to pilot some really productive innovations for our organization. One of which has been an expanded geographic scope with the services. So about 20% of our current veterans that we're working with are outside of the counties we historically primarily were serving. So we're really pleased to see that, and we hope that some of those trends will continue after the pandemic, and we can continue to apply those lessons learned. One of the sort of core functions that the report mentions is that these crises bring opportunity. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. And I know they mentioned Hurricane Katrina and some other models that, again, forced some innovations, but that ultimately also provide insight into solutions.
Well, as you mentioned, we're seeing not only telehealth, but telejustice. And even such extraordinary measures as an eviction moratorium. Talked to one Chief Justice of a state system who said that 2 weeks before the pandemic, 90% of his judges had never heard of any kind of a video conferencing. And 2 weeks afterwards, they were all using it. So there's a kind of extraordinary push to develop innovations out of necessity. And as you say, I think there's some silver linings, because some of these innovations I do believe will and should continue. VLS exemplifies two of the key recommendations from our report, which is partnerships, notably medical legal partnerships, but also partnerships with libraries and with social services, and really meeting people where they are. As you underscored, many people don't know there's a legal solution to their problem. And if they do seek out help, but it's not to a lawyer, we need to be where they're seeking out that help. And that is something that VLS has long done. And the other key recommendation where VLS has been so active is connections with advocates who are not lawyers, because of course the Veterans Administration has made that possible in the past, but finding ways to equip people and build teams that can connect, again, librarians, volunteers of all ages, to be able to share information and help people to access the benefits to which they are entitled, or the protections to which the law is devoted. That's something that can be done and should be done. And again, those two recommendations, I think, have sped up in many ways during the pandemic. And I do think that there are innovations in addition that use other technologies. You mentioned telephones. I found during my time on the Legal Services Corporation, the national funder of civil legal aid, that in some communities, the cell phone plan is both the possibility and the barrier to accessing services. Because if a hotline is the basic source of services and someone's put on hold and they use up their minutes, that's not access. So finding ways to create even special terms with the phone company plans, as well as using technology to speed up the triage on hotlines. Those are innovations that can be done and we think can be spread much more effectively than they have been.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And I know, one of the other recommendations of the report is also making the legal systems themselves easier to navigate and understand. And that was so evident in the video with the veteran who had been working on with the claim since 1991. That called to mind for me a World War II veteran that I worked with early on in my work with VLS, who had been applying since the 1970s for service connection, and we were finally able to achieve that for him, resulting in a very large sum of money retroactively. But this is somebody who had lived in poverty, rather unnecessarily for a large portion of his life because of the challenges of navigating that bureaucratic system. So, I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit more on, this core area of how can we make, government and justice systems work better for people in the first instance, so that, a lawyer's not necessary to navigate something like getting the benefits that you've earned through your military service.
Well, absolutely. It's one of the interesting features of some of the innovations that use technology. It's not just to have technology like a kiosk or a website, but to work with people who are not lawyers, who then ask basic questions. Well, why do you have to do this? And why are those the words you have to use? And to realize that the system is unnecessarily complex and difficult to navigate. So I have become a big fan of some of the technological innovations, again, not simply because technology can open access, but because working in teams on designing systems so that they are accessible can actually make justice available much more easily for everyone. And I do think that there is a real lesson here. There are wonderful programs like Suffolk Law School using technology to come up with streamlined ways to produce documents so that an individual interacting with a website can answer some questions and have produced at the other end documents that are usable by a court or an agency. Why can't we do that? We should be able to do that. It's interesting to me that right now eBay has developed online dispute resolution with much higher rates of satisfaction than anything that the public courts have. And there are very few people involved because a lot of it can be done by algorithms. Now, I think there have to be people involved. There have to be ways to escalate a claim or an objection so that a person sees it if it's not being resolved. But I think there's much, much more that can be done. So in the report, we look at the ways in which there are needs for a consequential increase in the financial and human resources devoted to civil justice, increase in the number of legal services lawyers, increase in the numbers of people who are not lawyers, who are trained and equipped to help navigate people. But let's be frank, we're never going to provide enough lawyers or even non-lawyer advocates for everyone who has a legal claim or a need. And we can make much more progress if we simultaneously simplify the systems and make them more user-friendly. The private sector has done this far more effectively and speedily than the public sector. Why shouldn't it be as easy to file for an uncontested divorce as it is to buy a pair of shoes on Amazon?
And I'm so glad that you referenced the need for an infusion of human capital here, because the report talks about the need for an expanded group of staff attorneys within legal aid, but also the role of pro bono, and that we can't pro bono our way out of this problem. I thought that was a very poignant comment. But nonetheless, volunteers from our profession have a role to play here. And I'm wondering if you could just expand more on kind of how those two dovetail together.
The veterans area is such an important exemplar. So when the Veterans Pro Bono Consortium was founded to provide pro bono representation in the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, it actually tapped unmet possibilities in both directions, providing counsel, but also giving lawyers who wanted to serve an easy way to do so. We need something similar generally. We need to make pro bono service easier. Again, technology can help match people up, people with a need and people who have some time to offer, and even some of the training. I think that an infusion of resources to actually pay for full-time lawyers can actually assist the leveraging of pro bono hours much more if there are more people who have the expertise and can offer training and backup. That's why the two really do come together. I've been very proud and honored to work at Harvard Law School as my colleague Dan Nagin proposed and developed the veterans program at our school. And it too has a model of working with full-time lawyers. In this case, it's part-time students, but also pro bono attorneys. And the combination is such a winner. In addition, our program developed some partnerships with tech people and, for example, created an online calculator to help veterans in Massachusetts determine whether they're eligible for the benefits that they are not receiving. We can do much more of that nature, and the partnerships with people who have those kinds of skills, as well as people with legal skills, I think can make a huge difference.
Dan and his team have been really wonderful collaborative partners in our work, and certainly that benefits calculator that you referenced for the Chapter 115 program is a resource we use regularly. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. And if Dan and his team are on, I want to thank you for that. And that's certainly something we can include in some of our follow-up information is some links to these resources. We're in this moment where criminal justice reform is really getting sustained attention. And it's inspiring and influential, but as the report notes, there's no parallel sort of movement with regards to civil justice reform and closing the civil justice gap. And yet at the same time, often these are issues that are very adjacent to those criminal questions. You heard in the video of the woman who has DCF coming and taking her child away. So I'm wondering if you can comment, on how we can both use this sustained attention to these other issues to also highlight some of these other inequalities that we're facing and that the pandemic has really laid bare.
The criminal system intersects with people's lives profoundly in ways that often have not been so visible. So the imposition of fines and fees, which actually have a civil nature, that can burden an individual and make it difficult to actually pay rent or just get out from under, that's something that deserves a really sustained attention. But you're quite right. We've had, as bad as it is, the criminal system, at least there are some rights, like right to counsel, in any case that involves substantial risk to individual liberty, the loss of a child or child custody, the loss of a home that has no parallel. So one of the recommendations in our report is actually recognizing that there's a lack of a sustained ongoing initiative to pursue and implement the goals of closing the justice gap. We also don't have just basic data collection to be able to identify the needs and also the benefits from applying just a few resources. I was lucky to serve on the Boston Bar study about access to justice a few years ago, which found that for every $1 spent on civil legal aid, it returned $5 back to the Commonwealth. Those kinds of cost benefit calculations are so obvious now that the studies have been done, and yet we don't have the political will to actually implement the findings. I think that there are ways that the legal community needs to do more to educate the public generally about legal rights, but also about the problems in the system, so that there is more of a possibility of political will to do something more sustained about it. Again, returning to veterans, veterans with low incomes face the same challenges as other people with low incomes. Their family issues, especially related to child custody, housing issues, particularly at this time, eviction, foreclosure, homelessness, employment issues, also driver's license restoration after driving under the influence or other kinds of problems, healthcare challenges of all sorts, including mental illness. And each of these actually is surrounded by a set of legal protections, if only they were enforced. And so making that clear to people who care about any of these areas, housing or healthcare, I think is something that we can all do.
I also just want to remind folks, please do feel free to post any questions in the chat, and make sure that you are posting those to both panelists and attendees so our team can compile those. I'm really glad that you brought up mental health and healthcare access, because one of the populations that we work with is veterans who've received less than honorable discharges. And often that can be a legacy of discriminatory policies, whether it's racism, sexism, don't ask, don't tell, or other LGBTQ discrimination. And these are folks who are then, often foreclosed from accessing VA healthcare or other services that could be exceptionally helpful in meeting their need. And it's something that we're making a sustained effort to work on. We have a number of firms on our pro bono panel who are helping with this effort and accepting referrals of those cases. But it's also an area that's ripe for some systemic reform. Why are we putting people into this status in the first place? And who are they and what were they struggling with that maybe has led to them having that status? And it also raises a demographic question. So the report highlights that women and people of color are among the most who are really hardest hit by this civil justice gap. And it happens that those are also the two demographics that are fastest growing in terms of our composition of our military. And so we have people coming from situations that are potentially really challenging, viewing the military as a way to secure an education or other opportunities, but then who are maybe facing physical or mental disabilities and returning to a community that's sort of least equipped to support them in that. So I'm hoping that you can comment just a little bit more on this current moment that we're having nationwide of really wrestling with our history of discrimination and how that plays into the civil justice gap generally.
You have to wonder, maybe it's just not by accident that there are these huge gaps that affect the people who have been most disadvantaged and marginalized historically. And so it's not by accident. But I do think that the recognition of the problems in the criminal system, I think demonstrate that there's a hunger in the country to do something better. I note that in the chat, there are some very good questions that are related. Are there some non-monetary solutions? Of course, is a good question at a time when everybody's budgets are strained. And I do think that the cost benefit calculus of the studies like the Boston Bar Association are helpful. If it actually saves money to provide civil legal assistance, it just requires looking beyond the next 6 months. Let's look over the next year, we'll save money. In addition, I think that some of the partnerships that we're seeing don't require much extra money to co-locate legal services in a health setting or in a social services setting or in a library. Doesn't require money. There are ways in which some of the tech tools that I've identified can be offered pro bono. There are tech companies that have resources and want to serve, and also students. Again, I cite the examples of the law schools here in the Boston area, where students are developing tech solutions. And I think that's very promising. I want to return to your, crucial point about who are the people who are most at risk and most affected. I think that finding a way that we can highlight that it is the health risks and the legal risks for people of color that are most affected by the ongoing justice gap, and also that there are real solutions. People are looking for solutions.
You also mentioned the key role that data can play here. And I know at VLS, one of the challenges that we found is that on the criminal side, there's an effort to identify defendants who have a history of military service in order to, if appropriate, route them into diversionary programs that are more treatment focused and less focused on incarceration and things like that. And we certainly applaud those efforts. Our partnership with the Norfolk Veterans Treatment Court, which Judge Hogan Sullivan spearheaded and was the inaugural session of that court that now is available throughout Massachusetts, has certainly been an important partnership of ours, because we found what was often getting people off track with their probation or other issues was, I have a debt collector calling me nonstop. I'm getting an eviction notice from my landlord. I'm behind on my child support and I don't know how to manage this situation. There were all of these adjacent civil issues that were coming up. But within the civil system, there is no comparable data collection as to who the litigants are coming into these systems. And for us, the reason that can often be relevant is there's often a solution to their problem that's veteran specific. So there are wonderful programs like the Supportive Services for Veteran Families program. We have a partnership with the New England Center under that program. But in addition to helping fund our services, it's also a source of paying back rent to keep someone in a sustainable tenancy, or first, last, and security to get them into a new apartment so they don't need to remain in a shelter setting. But because the housing court, for example, is not identifying who the defendants are in front of it in that way, they're also missing out on that opportunity to identify resources. And at the same time, we realize the courts that we're in are already at max capacity. It was not unusual on a typical housing court day in Suffolk County to have hundreds of people in the courthouse. The same would be true of the Department of Revenue session in probate and family court. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how investing in our court system as a co-equal form of government may also be a component of this reform.
Well, again, COVID is a kind of push to innovate. And I do think that some of the techniques that are being used in COVID time will continue, including using tech tools for remote hearings, being able to have a hearing for someone in housing court so they don't have to take the day off from work, but they can actually call in, would make a huge difference, and also speed up what's going on there. There are projects in the redesign of civil justice that are very, very promising. Frankly, Ontario, Canada has been more of a leader than many places in the United States. I've been delighted to work with people in the design field who just open up the avenues for very different ways to organize business. And because of COVID, I think that many more courts are exploring these possibilities. It will require some investment upfront. That is real. I do note another question in the chat that I guess I want to put to you, Anna, which is Is there a product or training that provides for first line non-legal workers an overview of the kinds of services that can be offered and what kind of legal issues can be addressed? This is from someone who works with the homeless veterans reintegration program.
Well, certainly that's something that our team is happy to do. We have some really wonderful staff who typically are working with the case managers and other service providers at our community partner sites, and we do regularly try to keep them updated and trained on these are the issues that really merit a legal referral, and sources of assistance, whether it's us or other organizations in the Commonwealth. We do have some income limits on our services, which is common to all legal aid. For the reference of our audience, just to have an understanding of kind of how poor do you have to be poor enough to receive free assistance. A lot of programs use the standard of 125% of federal poverty level, and that's about $12,700 a year for a single person. At VLS, we go to 200%, which is just a little bit less than twice that, but nonetheless is a really, really difficult amount of money to eke out an existence on in a high cost of living state like Massachusetts. So that gives you a sense of who is eligible for the services versus who may have the ability to pay market rate for an attorney. And I bring that up just because in the context of these referrals, the last thing we want is folks getting frustrated that they're over an income gap and now we've sent them to make yet another phone call or things like that. But for anyone that is interested in having us do some training and information on VLS's services and legal aid generally, please do reach out after today's program. That's certainly something that we're happy to work with you on. And we want to be sure that anyone working with veterans in Massachusetts is aware of the services and how to make productive referrals to our office.
It's striking to me that this country had a higher commitment to closing the justice gap 40 years ago than it does now. So in 1980, there was public funding for lawyers, for civil legal aid, so that where there would be one for every 36,000 people who are eligible. By 2018, it's one for every 61,000 people. We've gone backwards, and I guess I'm hopeful that with a new administration in Washington, there can be better partnerships with states and commonwealths like Massachusetts, as well as across the public and private sectors. The idea that people who serve this country are not getting the basic protections of the law that should apply to everybody, but my goodness, for people who served, it is really something. Shame on us. Shame on us. Now, my father, who's 95, is a World War II veteran. You mentioned World War II client, and we're so proud of his service. But what does that mean? What he came back as a young man aware of was the freedoms of this country, how significant they are, and has devoted his life to public service. We owe this to people who have served.
And I'm so glad that you brought up that prior generation of veterans, because about half of our veterans nationwide are over age 65. And that means they have the same needs as all of our other seniors, but also often again are dealing with a lot of unique challenges, especially our Vietnam era veterans are aging more rapidly than their civilian counterparts. They've had historical legacies of difficulty accessing these systems, and it's to their credit that improvements have been made over the years. So we do want to acknowledge that. I do see another question here. Unemployment due to COVID has seemingly caused or will cause a rental housing crisis in the US. What role do legal services play to prevent destabilization of families and communities?
It's a crucial question. There are some existing funds that can keep people in their homes, and there are some programs, but they are all going to run out. And so no one who cares about this should hesitate to be involved in the coalitions, some of which are faith-based and others that are seeking to extend those protections and enlarge them. We do know that losing your home or losing even having to move to another home is the big risk factor for a downward cascade. Matthew Desmond wrote his powerful book on eviction, showing that in the lives of women of color, an eviction has the same consequence that in the lives of men of color, conviction does, that incarceration does. It just moves people off track and into downward spirals with consequences for extended family. So keeping people in their homes is absolutely essential. It's not the landlord's fault. They also need to pay their mortgage. And so this needs a comprehensive solution that involves the banks and involves insurers and keeps communities stable. And that's in the interest of everyone else. The report, I'll post it again. Someone has asked, where is the Academy report? I had a link and I can post it again. It's in the chat. It's available for free, and we are now trying to do everything we can to make sure this report just doesn't sit on a shelf or on a website. And so please do share it with others. We think there are actionable items, and we're looking for ways to make it real.
I'm so glad you brought up that the return on investment of legal aid. The Boston Bar Report says 1 out of every $4. I know we've seen even more generous statistics than that. But what I think that really translates into is keeping people out of our most expensive systems, out of the shelter system, out of our jails, out of our emergency rooms, and having their needs met at a level where they're more actionable. And, in the context of the housing crisis, if we can intervene early in a housing matter, we have infinitely more options in terms of securing those resources to maybe catch up on rent, setting someone up with supportive services through the VA or another mental health provider or other health provider who can help, help them manage a disability. We have wonderful social workers and case managers who will do things through the VASH program, like go into someone's home and meet with them there if they're not able to get into a facility to get that care. And so there's a lot of really great resources out there. But again, we have to spread the word on those, be sure people know about them, and then deal with these questions of access that often pose these incredible challenges when you deal with these massive bureaucratic systems.
I've actually spent some time trying to figure out why access to justice isn't a more successful issue. We have the cost benefit studies, as you say. We have the moral arguments. We have the legal arguments. And I think that there are a couple of reasons, though. One is that there's still not a lot of knowledge about the dimensions that have a legal feature of many social issues that people actually care about. And so we do have an education task ahead of us. And the second is, I don't think that there's enough knowledge about the availability of real solutions, that I think that often looks to people to be an overwhelming set of issues. And again, I look at the COVID era innovations as just a demonstration that we can be nimble. Innovation is within reach. One more lesson I've drawn from COVID is how interdependent we all are. My well-being is literally tied to how other people behave. And it's not about how much money any of us have. And that's true about something like homelessness as well, that the well-being of community is tied to whether everybody has a safe place to sleep. Because if you don't have that, then the rest of the community actually is in jeopardy as well. And so those may be moral questions, those may be psychological questions, but I think I'm hoping that many of us walk forward from this COVID era with a greater sense of how intertwined we all are.
Certainly the refrain from the pandemic has been we're all in this together, and we've seen how that's very true with public health, but I think it's equally true in this context. I see another question: to what extent does the government, state or federal, fund the work of Veterans Legal Services? So we receive, as I mentioned, some supportive services for veterans and families funding. That's a VA grant that is the first of its kind to provide for legal services as a component of homelessness prevention. And that's through our incredible longstanding partnership with the New England Center and Home for Veterans. We also receive some funding from the Massachusetts Legal Assistance Corporation, the Mass Bar Foundation, the Boston Bar Foundation, as well as private family foundations and individual giving and corporate giving, including many of our pro bono partner law firms are also generous supporters. But the report is focused on LSC funding with the Legal Services Corporation, which is the federal component of this, which organizations like ours, often don't receive just because of our small size. And we're yet one of the only organizations in Massachusetts really devoted to meeting the legal needs of veterans, and the only that has that as its core mission across civil legal aid. So, certainly this infusion of capital that we were talking about, we hope that that will be widespread beyond just LSC.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's really an ecosystem. LSC funding carries with it a set of restrictions imposed by the Congress. And so it's only because there's a kind of distribution of cases and problems to other organizations that all needs can be met. I see another good question. Aside from providing pro bono services, how can a law firm get involved? I do think that there are the sharing of tech solutions that many law firms are now very sophisticated. For example, in creating a team collaborative platform, which is exactly what people in pro bono need to be able to do. If I can say, look, I have 8 hours I can devote to this, but I need to be able to collaborate with someone else, it would be great to get some in-kind services or even advice from law firms about how to do that. And similarly, I do think that law firms can contribute to this public education task, and including in any kind of materials about the firm, the importance of law in solving social problems. And the importance of collaborations with non-lawyers. So those are two possibilities. I think a third, of course, is money. Besides pro bono services, law firms can contribute directly to an organization like VLS, and what a difference that can make.
And we have a plan for what we would like to do with that investment. So we are in the process of a strategic planning initiative, and we do plan to try to double our impact by 2025. And we want to do that both through increasing availability of direct services, but also focusing on impact level advocacy, sort of at the systems level, whether that be through appellate litigation or policy work or things like that. So the more folks we have on our team for that effort, the better. And we certainly welcome our pro bono partners to join us in that. We do have about 5 minutes left, so I want to invite you to share any final thoughts before we wrap up this morning. But
I was so lucky to have as my co-chair of the Veterans Subcommittee for our report, Nan Heald, who is the director of Pine Tree Legal Aid in Maine. And Pine Tree has been such a leader, really inspiring me, creating, for example, a website stateside that assists the family members of veterans as well as veterans in navigating legal rights and needs. and finding the strengths of people in local communities and the work that they've done and lifting it up and making it more visible and more available. That is something I think we all can do. I'm so moved myself by what VLS does. And I think that collaboration is key. There's a question here: what organization can coordinate the development of a platform that could connect someone who works on a discharge upgrade to someone who's a student loan expert? That's exactly what we need to do. It's to combine some of the tech tools with this mindset of partnering. And I think that's a great charge for us going forward. I know that already VLS is a connector, already does a lot with partnerships and with connecting to the law school, our law school program on student debt, for example, but there's more that we can do.
And I think a lot of those partnerships and collaborations have evolved organically within the legal aid space, but we can do more outside of our own community. And certainly that's something we strive to do through these various partnerships that we have, but we know that there's lots of fruit out there for continued growth and continued collaboration.
Well, and the movement of VLS beyond the immediate Boston area is such a model. We know that for veterans, that people who live in rural communities, it's particularly difficult to access help. But the telephone and go to the public library and access a website and maybe even a Zoom call can make a huge, huge difference. I'm also myself very impressed by the ways in which groups like Starbucks and Walmart have created partnerships with Veterans Legal Services. And for communities that don't have a Walmart or a Starbucks, we need to figure out, well, who is the partner where there can be some pro bono services that are made available.
And those issues of equity and broadband access and all of those other things play out as part of all of that ecosystem. We're going to continue to forge ahead on the work that we do. I think folks might like to hear just how you're spending your time these days, both at Harvard and then with the Academy of Arts and Sciences as well.
Well, thanks. And thanks again for this opportunity. Teaching remotely has its charms and challenges. My students are all over the world and they're in different time zones. I'll be teaching in the spring for the second time a course that uses design tools to help redesign features of the legal system with a co-teacher who really knows about design from the IDEO design firm. And my students are just giving it their all. And that is, for me, the source of greatest hope.
Well, certainly working with law students is a big component of our program as well. And we hope that they take what they learn from us and carry it on to their legal career, whether it's in legal aid or government or with a firm or other forms of private practice. So, we will continue to do our best to build a new generation of lawyers ready to share the benefits of legal aid with their friends and family and colleagues. And I encourage all of our attendees who are in our profession to do the same, but also those who maybe are learning for the first time today, about these legal components to some of these broader social problems, to think of us as a resource and a potential solution, and also a place where additional investment can really yield a lot of return. So we want to
as a law school dean, I can tell you, I had the great opportunity to talk with alumni all over the world, and the numbers of people who would tell me about their pro bono work as their most meaningful, I can't even count. And so I think everyone who does pro bono knows what you get more doing it than you even give.
Well, it's our pleasure to be able to provide those opportunities as well. So thank you so much, Martha. This has been a really wonderful morning. And thank you to all of our attendees. I know that adding another Zoom to your day is sometimes a big ask right now. So we really do appreciate you spending this hour with us. And as I said, we will be posting the program on our website and following up with you all with some more of this information, including a link to that report. So take care, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day and your week, and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you all. Thank you, Anna.